There are decisions you make in farming that echo for decades. Decisions about land, decisions about debt, decisions about loyalty. And then there are decisions that don't just echo, they detonate. This is about one of those decisions. A decision made in grief, fueled by pride and justified by progress. A decision that cost a man his farm, his reputation, and the only machine that ever understood him. Tom Harker grew up on 840 acres in southern Illinois. Corn and soybeans, standard rotation, standard life. His father, Gene Harker, ran that farm for 42 years with the same philosophy. Buy once, maintain always, trust what works. And what worked for Gene Harker was Massey Ferguson. Not because of marketing, not because of dealer relationships. Because in 1981, Gene bought a Massey Ferguson 27775, and that tractor never once left him stranded. It pulled, it started, it worked. When other farmers were calling for tow trucks or waiting on parts shipments, Gene was in the field, every year, every season, no drama. Tom grew up watching that machine. He learned to drive on it, learned to plow, disc, plant, and pull with it. His father didn't talk much, but he talked about that tractor. He'd say things like, "This machine doesn't care how I feel, it just works." And Tom understood. In farming, feelings don't harvest corn. Machines do, reliable ones. But Gene Harker died in October of 2019. Heart attack. No warning. One day he was walking the back 40, checking moisture. The next day he was gone. And Tom, 34 years old, inherited the farm. All of it. The land, the debt, the equipment, and that Massey Ferguson 2775. It was still running, still pulling. Gene had kept it perfect. New injectors 2 years prior, fresh hydraulics, paint was faded, but everything underneath was solid. The tractor had over 18,000 hours on it, but it ran like it had 8. Tom's wife, Jenny, told him to keep it. "Your dad loved that thing," she said. "It still works. Why change?" And for the first few months, Tom agreed. He used the Massey Ferguson through late fall, pulled the grain cart, moved equipment, did everything Gene would have done. But something was eating at him, something he couldn't quite name. Every time he sat in that seat, he felt his father's shadow. Not in a comforting way, in a suffocating way. He felt like he was living someone else's life, driving someone else's tractor, following someone else's plan. The Massey Ferguson didn't just represent his father's success, it represented his father's limits. Gene had farmed the same 840 acres for 4 decades and never expanded, never diversified, never pushed beyond what that one tractor could handle. And Tom looked at that machine and saw a ceiling, a boundary he didn't want to accept. Then, in January of 2020, Tom went to the Farm Progress Show in Decatur. He walked through the rows of new equipment, shining paint, digital displays, GPS guidance, auto steer, precision agriculture. He stopped at the John Deere exhibit. A dealer rep named Kyle approached him. Clean boots, friendly smile, tablet in hand. Kyle didn't push. He just asked questions. "What are you running now?" Tom told him. "Massey Ferguson, 2775. 40 years old." Kyle nodded, respectful, but then he said something that stuck. "That's a hell of a workhorse. But you're farming with a museum piece. You know that, right?" Tom felt it. That sting. That subtle implication. You're behind. You're old-fashioned. You're not modern. Kyle kept talking. He walked Tom around a John Deere 8R340. Articulated, 13.5-liter engine, 340 horsepower, integrated technology, wireless data transfer, automated throttle management. Everything Gene Harker never needed, and everything Tom suddenly wanted. Kyle pulled up yield maps on his tablet, showed him testimonials, showed him financing options, and then he said the line that sealed it. "Your father built a legacy with what he had. You could double it with what we have." Tom left that show with a brochure. But more than that, he left with a belief. A belief that he wasn't dishonoring his father by upgrading. He was honoring him by evolving, by taking the farm further, by proving that Gene's work wasn't the ceiling, it was the foundation. He told himself that story all winter, and by March, he believed it. In April of 2020, Tom called the John Deere dealership in Effingham. He asked for Kyle. They set up a meeting. Tom brought financial statements, tax returns, loan history. The dealer's finance manager ran the numbers. The 8R340 was listed at $385,000. Tom didn't have that kind of cash, but he had equity. He had land, and he had the Massey Ferguson 2775. Kyle offered him a trade-in value of $18,000. Tom's stomach turned. $18,000 for a tractor his father had run for 4 decades? Kyle saw his face. "I know it's tough," Kyle said, "but that's the market. Age, hours, and brand all factor in. If it were a Deere, maybe 25, but Massey Ferguson doesn't hold value like it used to." That phrase, "doesn't hold value," it dug in. Tom thought about all the times that tractor had held value, held its ground, held a load, held together when everything else failed. But Kyle wasn't talking about performance, he was talking about resale, and in that moment, Tom made the decision. He signed the papers, took the loan, traded the Massey Ferguson, and drove off the lot in a brand new John Deere 8R340. Jenny didn't say much when he brought it home. She walked around it once, looked at the size of it, the shine, the screen inside the cab. Then she asked, "How much?" Tom told her. She went quiet. Then she said, "We're going to be paying that off for 10 years. Tom nodded. "Yeah, but we're going to be making more too. This thing can cover twice the ground. Better fuel economy, better precision. We'll make it back." Jenny looked at him. "Your dad made it work without all this." Tom's jaw tightened. "I'm not my dad." And that was the truth. He wasn't. Gene Harker never borrowed what he couldn't pay back in 2 seasons. Gene Harker never bought a machine he couldn't fix himself. Gene Harker never trusted a computer to tell him what the dirt already showed. But Tom wanted to believe there was a better way, a smarter way, a modern way. The first season with the John Deere felt like vindication. Tom planted 600 acres in 4 days. The auto steer was flawless. The GPS kept his rows tight. The ride was smooth. The cab was quiet. He sent Jenny a photo from the seat. Grinning, thumbs up, screen glowing green. She texted back a single word, "Good." But she didn't sound convinced. By July, the 8R had logged 300 hours. No issues. Tom was proud. He told other farmers at the co-op. Told them about the fuel savings. Told them about the speed. A few nodded. A couple asked questions. But one guy, an older farmer named Wendell, just shook his head. "Your dad's Massey would have done the same job." Tom bristled. "Not this fast." Wendell shrugged. "Fast don't mean profitable." Tom ignored him. He was too deep in the glow, too deep in the validation. This was working. This was progress. This was proof. He even started talking about expansion. Maybe lease another 200 acres. Maybe add a second planter. The John Deere had opened a door in his mind, a door his father had never walked through. And then August hit. Tom was running the 8R through a late fertilizer application. Middle of a 400-acre stretch. Temperature was pushing 96 degrees. He'd been in the seat for 6 hours. Everything was smooth. Then without warning, the screen went black. Not dim. Black. The engine kept running, but every digital system shut down. No GPS, no auto steer, no throttle control, no diagnostics. Tom tried rebooting. Nothing. He tried the manual override. Partial response, but sluggish. He pulled to the edge of the field and called the dealership. Kyle answered. Tom explained the issue. Kyle said, "Sounds like a software fault. We'll send a tech out." Tom asked when. Kyle said, "Tomorrow morning, maybe afternoon. We're backed up." Tom felt his chest tighten. "I'm in the middle of an application. I need this thing running today." Kyle's tone stayed polite but firm. "I get it, but the system requires a diagnostic scan. We can't do that remotely on your model. Tech has to be on site." Tom hung up. He sat in that cab staring at a blank screen in the middle of a field with a $385,000 machine that wouldn't think. His father's Massey Ferguson had a throttle cable and a key. If something broke, you could see it, touch it, fix it. This was a black box, and he was locked out. The tech arrived the next afternoon, plugged in a laptop, ran a scan. 40 minutes later, he said, "You've got a corrupted module in the guidance system. Needs a replacement. I don't have it on the truck. Have to order it." Tom asked how long. The tech said, 3 days, maybe 5, depends on the part warehouse. Tom lost a week, a full week, right in the middle of his application window. He tried to run the tractor manually, but without the guidance system, he couldn't maintain the precision he'd planned for. Rows drifted, coverage overlapped, he burned extra product, wasted time. And when the part finally arrived and the tech installed it, Tom got a bill, $2,200. Not covered under warranty because the module failure was classified as environmental stress, which meant heat, dust, or moisture. All things that exist on a farm. Tom paid it. but the confidence was gone. September brought more trouble. The 8R started throwing error codes, random ones, engine temp sensor, DEF system malfunction, hydraulic pressure warning. Some were real, some were ghost signals. But every time a light came on, Tom had to stop, had to call, had to wait. The dealership kept saying the same thing. It's a complex machine. These things happen. We'll get you sorted. But sorting took time, and time in harvest season is everything. By October, Tom had spent over $8,000 in service calls and parts that weren't covered. The tractor ran, but it didn't run like it had in May. It felt temperamental, moody, like it was looking for reasons to quit. Tom started dreading the seat. Every morning he'd climb in, half expecting another black screen, another error, another call to Kyle. Then November came, corn harvest, the busiest, most critical 2 weeks of the year. Tom was pulling a grain cart across wet ground. Not muddy, just damp. The kind of damp Gene Harker would have worked through 100 times with the Massey Ferguson. But the 8R's weight distribution was different, heavier, more concentrated, and the ground started to give. Tom felt the back end sink. He throttled up. The tires spun. He tried to reverse. Nothing. The differential lock engaged, but the tractor was stuck, buried to the axle. Tom called a neighbor with a dozer. It took 4 hours to pull the 8R out. When they finally got it free, the rear axle housing had a crack. Not catastrophic, but enough to need a weld and a full inspection. Another service call, another bill. This one was $6,800. Jenny saw the invoice on the kitchen table. She didn't yell. She just looked at him and said, "We can't keep doing this." Tom didn't answer, because she was right. By the end of that first year, Tom had spent $14,000 in repairs, software fixes, and parts on a machine that was supposed to be new. Flawless, modern. The John Deere still ran, but it had cost him more in 12 months than his father's Massey Ferguson had cost in a decade. But the real damage wasn't the money. It was the realization. Tom started doing the math. The loan payment on the 8R was $4,200 a month. Over 10 years, that was $504,000. Add in the service costs, the downtime, the extra labor to cover for breakdowns, and he was looking at over $50,000 in year one expenses alone. Meanwhile, the Massey Ferguson 2775 he'd traded away, it was still working. He saw it at an auction in March of 2021. A farmer from Kentucky had bought it, painted it, put new tires on it, and it was pulling a 12-bottom plow like it had been born for it. Tom stood there in the auction crowd and watched that tractor work, watched it do exactly what it had done for his father. No screen, no software, no error codes, just iron and fuel and will. The auctioneer was calling out bids, 32,000, 35, 38. Someone next to Tom said, "That old Massey's got some heart." Tom didn't respond. He just watched the machine his father had trusted, the machine he'd given away for $18,000. The machine that was now worth double that because someone else saw what he'd stopped seeing. He felt sick. By summer of 2021, 18 months after the trade, Tom was drowning. The 8R had suffered another major failure, this time a transmission sensor cluster that required a full teardown. Another $12,000. His operating line of credit was maxed. His cash reserves were gone. He'd sold off a piece of equipment to cover a payment. And Jenny had started talking to a lawyer, not because she was angry, because she was scared. The farm was bleeding, and Tom wouldn't admit it. One night in July, she sat him down and said, "You need to sell that tractor." Tom shook his head. "I can't. I'm upside down on the loan. I owe more than it's worth." Jenny's voice cracked. "Then we sell land." Tom looked at her like she'd struck him. "That's my father's land." She leaned forward. "Your father's land is going to get foreclosed on if you don't do something." Tom knew she was right, but pride is a hell of a thing. He kept telling himself it would turn around. One good year, one clean harvest, one season without a breakdown. That's all he needed. But that season never came. In October of 2021, the bank called. They wanted a meeting. Tom sat across from a loan officer named Morris. Morris was polite, professional. He laid out the numbers. Tom was 4 months behind on the equipment loan, 2 months behind on the operating line. The farm was underperforming projections by 30%. Morris slid a sheet of paper across the desk. "We're not foreclosing yet," he said, "but we need a plan. and that plan needs to include asset liquidation. Tom asked what that meant. Morris said, sell the tractor, pay down the loan, refinance what's left, and get something you can actually afford. Tom left that meeting and sat in his truck in the bank parking lot for an hour. He didn't cry, he just stared. Stared at the steering wheel. Stared at nothing. And he thought about his father, thought about the Massey Ferguson, thought about the 40 years Gene Harker had farmed without ever sitting in a bank parking lot like this. He thought about the moment he signed the papers at the dealership, the moment Kyle handed him the keys to the 8R, the moment he drove off the lot feeling like he'd finally stepped out of his father's shadow. That feeling had lasted 6 months. And now, sitting in this parking lot, he realized what he'd actually stepped into. Not progress, not evolution, just debt, just dependence, just a trap dressed up as technology. 2 weeks later, Tom listed the John Deere 8R 340 for sale. He set the price at $320,000, lower than market because he needed it gone. It sat for 3 weeks, no offers. He dropped it to $295, then $270. Finally, a farmer from Missouri called, offered $250. Tom took it. After the sale, the payoff on the loan left him with $18,000, the exact amount he'd been offered for his father's Massey Ferguson. He'd come full circle. Except now he had no tractor, no equity, and no faith in his own judgment. Tom bought a used Case IH from an estate sale, paid $32,000 cash. It was older, simpler, mechanical. It didn't have a screen. It didn't have GPS. But it started every time. And it didn't send him error codes at 2 in the morning. Jenny stayed, barely. The lawyer meeting stopped, but the tension didn't. She'd look at him sometimes with this expression, not anger, not pity. Something closer to disappointment, like she was mourning the man he used to be. Tom still farms that land, but he's smaller now. He sold a quarter section to pay off the remaining equipment debt. He runs tighter margins. He doesn't go to trade shows anymore, doesn't talk to dealers, doesn't trust the shine. When neighbors ask him about equipment, he keeps it short. Buy what you can fix, he says. Buy what you can pay off. They nod. Some of them understand, some of them don't. But none of them push. And every now and then, late at night, he thinks about that Massey Ferguson 2775. Thinks about the sound it made, the way it pulled, the way his father trusted it. And he wonders what would have happened if he'd just kept it, just honored what worked, just listened to the only voice that mattered. He wonders if he would have expanded slower, farmed smarter, built equity instead of debt. He wonders if Jenny would have looked at him differently, if the bank would have stayed quiet, if he would have slept better. But he didn't. He chased progress, chased validation, chased the idea that newer meant better, and it cost him everything his father had built. There's a photo in Tom's office. It's faded now. Shows Gene Harker standing next to the Massey Ferguson 2775, taken in 1983. Gene's wearing a work shirt and boots, the tractor's covered in dust. Neither one of them is smiling. They didn't need to. They were working. That's all that mattered. Tom looks at that photo sometimes, looks at the dirt on the tires, the wear on his father's hands, the simplicity of it all, and he realizes what his father understood, what Tom had to lose everything to learn. In farming, loyalty isn't just a feeling, it's a strategy. And when you trade it away for a screen and a promise, you don't just lose a machine, you lose your foundation. And once that's gone, everything else is just weight. Tom Harker learned that lesson in 18 months, and he'll spend the rest of his life paying for it. Not in dollars, those are already gone, but in regret. In the quiet moments, when he sits in the cab of that used Case IH and remembers what it felt like to drive something his father trusted, something that never asked for more than fuel and maintenance, something that worked. Because that Massey Ferguson didn't just run for 40 years. It ran because Gene Harker believed in it, took care of it, never questioned it. And the moment Tom questioned that, the moment he decided his father's way wasn't good enough, he lost more than a tractor. He lost the farm, the marriage, the future, and all he got in return was a screen that went black.